This is the Building Automation Monthly podcast with Phil Zito, episode 74. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 74 of the Building Automation Monthly podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to be discussing how to create the ultimate project training plan. So we are going to go through step by step how we can create training plans that don't suck. Now, everything I mention in this episode is going to be available at buildingautomationmonthly.com/74. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/74. So I've had one interesting day. I got a call while I was at work today, and my wife was saying, hey, our 11-year-old daughter slipped trying to do something and hit her head and was crying and wanted us to go pick her up. This isn't the first time that I've had a, last minute event with my daughter. It was kind of funny, actually, although in the moment it was really freaking scary. Was that, she got into a breath holding contest when she was 8 years old and ended up passing out and having seizures, and we were all freaking out. We didn't know what happened, and I was in Nashville at the time, and we live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so for those of you who aren't from the US, that's, a couple hour plane ride, about an hour and a half. And so I'm sitting there, how am I going to get over there? How am I going to fly? I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to leave the customer meeting. And then we find out she was just having a breath holding contest and it wasn't a big deal. So you may be wondering, why am I telling you this? Well, why I'm telling you this is that, much like my daughter has gotten herself into trouble by just kind of following the prompting of other people, what I want to give you for today's technical tip of the day is to not just follow what everyone else does, because there's a lot of really bad building automation advice. And one of the things that the building automation field as a whole kind of prides itself on is this kind of tribal knowledge hand down kind of process where you come in and you're the new guy, and then the older guy will come and they'll hand down the knowledge they've gained. For the most part, that'll work most of the times. But what I want you to really embrace, especially if you're newer to this industry, is to challenge the conventional thinking. Even when I tell you stuff, and I like to think of myself as an expert, I have done a ton of stuff with building automation systems, been in a lot of different positions, done a lot of different things. But I would say, even with the advice that I give you, you should be cautiously accepting of anything you hear. And so that's my tip for you today. It's not so much a technical tip, but just more of a kind of experiential tip. I want you to not just go and follow what everyone else is doing, but wonder, is there a different way? If everyone else is going and creating graphics a certain way, is that the best way to create graphics? Has anyone ever stopped and asked customers how they're going to use the graphics? If everyone is creating 15-minute trends or trends based on change of value, is that the best thing? Is it the best thing to just go and trend everything, just go alarm everything because everyone else is doing it? So if you really want to step outside, be unique, and just get above where everyone else is in the building automation industry, then I want you to challenge the status quo. I want you to challenge what you're being told and realize that just because someone's been doing something for several years does not mean that they necessarily have the answer. Which is a perfect segue to tonight's topic, which is the topic of how to create the ultimate project training plan. Not just a project training plan, but the ultimate project training plan. And why is this even necessary? Why am I talking to you about this today? Why, you would think project training. Yeah, Phil, I know what project training is. It's at the end of the project, we've got 8 hours that has been mandated by the specification. And in reality, I maybe have 4 hours of the owner's time, and I'm just going to bring them a bunch of donuts, and we're just going to drive through the system, and we're going to click on a bunch of stuff, and we're going to call it a day. At least that's what most project training is like. And I could see, those of you who have been in the field for a little while, you're nodding your heads. You're like, yeah, that is what happens. You know, either they're mandated 8 or maybe in some cases they're mandated 40 hours, but for the most part you're mandated a slot of time. And with that slot of time, you then try to go and put training in place that's going to benefit the end user. But here's the deal. Even if you put training in place, in reality, the training is not going to be as effective as it could be. It's not going to cover all the things it needs to cover. And there's a multitude of reasons why this happens. But the main reasons why this happens are because what's going on is that you have this specified training for the building automation system. But you also have specified training for the fire alarm system, for the lighting system, for all these different systems. And so you can imagine, just like put yourself in the owner's shoes for a second, right? And so there's this owner, and they've got to operate a building because, that's what they do. They operate the building, right? I mean, it's like common sense. But there they are being asked to attend all this training. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been like instructed about a bunch of different things all at the same time, you start to get overwhelmed and you start to kind of zone out. And then you mix that with just the joy of owning a brand new building and all the things that are going on and all the expectations that are placed upon you. And it's like this perfect recipe for disaster. This brand new facility, these facility owners, and all the meanwhile, they're being asked to go and get trained on all this stuff and operate the facility at the same time. So how can we do this any different? I mean, is it possible for us to do this differently? Is it possible with all those constraints? I mean, painted a pretty gloom picture here, right? Pretty much gloom and doom. You've got everyone else competing for their attention, and they're trying to operate a building. Man, it must be impossible to do good training. Yet, among all these conditions, there's folks out there who are providing excellent project training. And I like to believe that I myself am one of them. I've figured out a way that is effective and yet not overwhelming to the user. And what I like to call this is, I call this my 4-step plan for post-project training. And here's how it goes. So there's 4 steps, and I'm going to describe what the 4 steps are, and then I'm going to take you through each one of the steps. Now, some of this stuff, it's going to be probably the first time you've ever been exposed to this. And you know what? If so, awesome, because that means you're learning something new. I mean, that's really cool, right? See, I'm a firm believer of taking things I learn in other fields, in other industries, and combining them together to get a better result. And so the first step of this process is to do a pre-training survey. The second step is then to create your training plan. The third step is to execute the training. And then the fourth step is to do post-training follow-up. All right, so let's dive into what each one of these are. So pre-training survey. Let me ask you something. If you were going to teach someone something, would you just okay, let's say you want to teach someone how to change brakes. would you just pull a random person off the street and they're the person you're teaching, and you just start teaching them about brakes? You're like, this is a brake line and there's fluid and it compresses the brake. And would you start explaining all that to them? No, probably not, right? I mean, it wouldn't make sense. Or let's take something more industry relevant. Let's say you're trying to teach someone about how a VFD drive works. Would you just start diving into, all right, here's your control signal, here's your on off signal, here's your alarm. All right, go set it up, have a good day. No, I mean, you would go and figure out where they're at. I mean, you wouldn't want to teach them the basics when they already know the basics, but you wouldn't want to teach them advanced stuff if they don't even know the basics. Do you see kind of where I'm going with this? See, the problem is that oftentimes training, it's kind of this one size fits all approach. And then folks wonder, why is the training not effective? Well, it's not effective because you're not training to the level that the people are at. So one step to find out where people are at is to do a survey. But how do you do a survey? This isn't something where you have to go retain a firm or buy some expensive survey software. You could do all of this really with just a Google form. And a Google form is basically an online form that you can create and ask a series of questions, and you email it to someone, they fill it out, and you get a response, and voila, there you go. So what you can do with this survey, with this pre-training survey, is you can ask a series of questions. You could say, have you used this BAS before? Have you used any BAS before? What is your experience? What do you do? What do you expect to do? You just kind of try to get into the person's head and understand, how is the person going to use the BAS? Why are they going to be using the BAS? When? Where are they going to be using the BAS? Have they used it before? Because getting the answers to these questions is going to expose to you what the skill level and needs of the students coming into your class. And I really want you to think of them that way. For at least these 8 hours, I want you to think of these people as being students in your class. Because when you have that minor shift, when you switch from them being an owner and a customer to them being a student, how you talk to them, how you teach them, how you instruct them is going to change. It just is. I can't explain why it changes, but it just does. There's this conditioning culturally that we are conditioned to expect certain things from students and certain things from teachers. Like if you're looking at it from an owner technician perspective and you ask the owner to put away their phone because they need to focus on the training, you're going to get a totally different response than if you look at it from the student teacher perspective, because a teacher is looked at as an authority. And so you can then go and say, I'm going to expect that all phones are put away during this training because this training is critically important. And just that minor difference of mindset shift, of positioning, is going to make a massive difference in the respect you get from the students, the attentiveness you get from the students, and simply your ability to deliver. But in order to deliver, we need to take all the information we've learned from our survey and we need to move into step number 2, which is creating your training plan. Now, whenever you're creating a training plan, you have to realize that you have to train to the lowest level of the person in the group. However, you can't make it freaking boring. I mean, that is the challenge I face every single time I record a podcast. Every single time I write a blog post. I am faced with the same challenge you are faced with, which is that I have folks of different skill sets, listening to what I'm saying, and each one of them comes here to learn. But if I only teach the basics, then the folks who want to know the more advanced things are going to be bored out of their minds. But if I go right to the advanced things, then the folks who need to know the basics are going to have no idea what's going on, and they're going to shut down, or even worse, they're going to misinterpret what I'm teaching, and they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to be like, that Phil guy, he told me to do this, and I went and did it, and it didn't work, when they didn't see the 4 or 5 steps before doing that a more advanced person would know by default you need to do. Now, that's no fault of their own. That's my fault as a teacher if I am not delivering it in a way that both sides can consume. And that's an art. That's something you learn over time. However, I really hate it when people say, it's an art. Like, I have this mentality, and maybe it's ego, maybe it's not, I don't know, but I think I can learn anything. That's just me. And that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, because I come across to some people as a little, like, really overconfident, and that rubs some people the wrong way, because they're like, oh man, that guy, he thinks his crap doesn't stink. And that's not at all the case. When people get to know me, I'm the first person to ask for feedback and to say, hey, I want to know where I'm messing up. And if I mess up, I go and I let people know. But where I was going with this is that I really do not like when people are like, it's an art, not a science. Because 95% of it, you can learn. And that really irritates me when people like preclude people from certain things because they're like, oh, it's an art. You haven't been doing it for 20 years, so you would not understand. You've only been doing it a year. Well, you know what? Maybe the person's really freaking good. And so after a year, they've got it down and they've nailed it. They don't have to stick through 20 years of doing something. And maybe that's a generational thing. I don't know. But anyways, what I'm getting at here is that you can be a good trainer. You don't have to spend years becoming a trainer. You can be a good trainer by just going and knowing your audience, taking that teacher role, and then creating a specific plan. So what does that plan look like? Well, that plan looks like 3 main things. First, you want that fundamental knowledge set. So knowing the audience, knowing what the students are looking for, you're going to lay out the foundational elements of what they need to know. So if all your students reply that they operate the central plant and they need to know how to look at alarms and dig into systems, then your fundamentals are going to be, can they log into the system? Can they go and access the right points? Can they go and troubleshoot? Can they open up the programs and see that things are working? These are like fundamental skills that you're going to want to cover, right? So you go and cover those fundamental skills. But then hey, everyone in this class is the central plant team. So you're going to want to do some job specific. This is part 2 of the training. So part 1 was the fundamentals. Part 2 is the job specific training. And this is where you're going to want to go and look at the roles and say, all right, you guys are operating the central plant. Well, let's look at what your central plant sequence looks like. Let's look at the different logic blocks that are going to make it happen, the different things in global logic that are going to impact it. Really dig into those job-specific things. And then you're going to look at essential questions and essential knowledge. And these are things that during your survey, your students expressed like they've got to learn this. One of my favorite questions to ask is like, what is the most important thing or the 3 most important things for you around building automation systems? And then, you get to flush out what people actually need to know around building automation systems. So if you go and you cover those 3 parts, you will have a really solid building automation training program. All right. So then we come up to step 3. And step 3 is execute the training. Now, I want you to, only if you're not driving, but if you are driving, then just pretend you're doing this. But I want you to put your hand up in the air and say, Phil, I swear from this point forth, I will do all training off site. I will not do training at the customer's site. Okay, you just swore to me that you were never again going to do training at the customer site. That is like the worst idea ever. That is like asking my tax person to come over here and do taxes with me after giving my 3 kids like Pop Rocks, Pixie Sticks, and Mountain Dew, and then like turning on pop music and giving them a bunch of water guns and being like, okay, kids, I need you to stay calm and quiet while I do the taxes. That's not gonna happen, right? Well, it's the same thing when you do training at the owner's site. It is so easy, especially considering that in most cases you're doing training in the conference room right next to the facility office. It's so easy for someone to be like, hey, Bob, got an issue. Oh, hold on there for a second, Phil. I got to step out real quick. I got to check this out. It's a lot harder when you're 20 miles away from your site for someone to just step in and be like, hey, can you step out here real quick? Look at this. No, it's so much more attention, so much more focus. And there's a shift in the mindset of your students when they leave their organization and they come over to your facility. It is a massive, massive thing. So you really, really, really need to look at training offsite. Now, some of you may be like, but Phil, I don't have a facility to train offsite. In which case, I would say to you, that is actually a really simple problem to solve. They have these things that are called conference rooms. And you can rent them at hotels. You can rent them at like rental rooms to go. There's all sorts of, if you look at office space daily rentals, you'll find all sorts of rooms that you can rent by the day. And it's really not that expensive when you think about it. You can go and build that into the price of the job if you absolutely have to. But those are ways that you can have a facility. Now that you have the facility, you simply need to execute the training, which is where you need to just sit down, you need to work your plan, you need to go through your steps and work with your students through the things that they need to know. Now let's say you have followed the 3 steps, you've surveyed your students, you know what they need to learn. You've went and set up your training. You've even went and took them outside of their organization and you've given them some excellent training. Now what? Now we're going to get to the part of the training that is often not specified and thus often not done. But if you do this, if you are one of the few who take this 4th step, who take this next step, you will stand head and shoulders above everyone else because no one, well, maybe a couple, very few people are doing this next step. And that is called post-training follow-up. I know that there's this belief that why would someone spend money? They've got the warranty phase. I've been guilty of that myself. Like, why would I propose service to someone? They've got the warranty phase. You know, contrary to popular belief, if you're providing value, people will pay for it. You know? So here's the trick. Here's what you need to do. You need to have a post follow-up plan. First off, it's the right thing for the customer because it's going to go and continue to reinforce what you've taught them. It's going to make them a better operator. It's going to make them more satisfied with your building automation system. It's going to make them more effective at running their facilities. All of these things, selfishly, are going to play to your benefit because if you've got a customer who knows how to use their system, likes using their system, and is good at using their system, do you think they're going to go and get a different system? Probably not, right? So this is your opportunity to go and create health checks or checkpoints that you say, you know what, Mr. Customer, here's what I'd like to do. The training you've went through It's been very important. It's really going to help you be successful in operating your building automation system and thus operating your facility and keeping your facility at peak performance. But did you know that as soon as the warranty phase ends, actually sometimes during the warranty phase, customers will start to become overwhelmed. They'll start to forget what they've learned, and they'll start to let their building automation system drift. What I propose to you is that for the next year, every 3 months, we come out for a day and we do a training session with your team to reinforce the fundamentals and to answer any questions you may have around how to operate the building automation system. What that will do is that will really ingrain in your team how to use the building automation system, how to operate your facilities, and it'll make your day-to-day life even easier. So would you like to find out more information about that? Now, who in their right mind is going to say no to that? I mean, yeah, I get it. There may be like a 4-story commercial office building where they're like, yeah, we don't really care. But a hospital, a university, a corporate campus, yeah, they're going to take you up on that. I mean, the cost versus benefit, it is so much benefit for so little cost, but it's all in how you position it. If you position it properly, then you can make a very compelling case for going and investing in ongoing building automation training. But the thing is that most people will not do this. Most people will be afraid to talk to the customer. Why? I have no idea. I have no idea why folks don't go and just say it. What's the worst thing someone could say? No. Are they going to get mad at you? Hey, I'm really pissed that you care that I know how to use my building automation system, so I'm going to be mad at you now. No. I mean, come on. Seriously. I mean, we tiptoe around things. We hesitate to go and tell customers which are things that are good for them. And then we wonder why they're all ticked off 3 years later and they got this building automation system that they can't figure out how to use and they're mad at us. Well, whose fault is that, really? I mean, we like to be like, well, the customers, if they just paid attention, they'd to that 8-hour training session I gave them when everyone else was giving them 8-hour training sessions, then they'd know what to do. I mean, seriously? Really? I mean, that's like La La Land fantasy right there. So, in closing, here's what I want to leave you with, all right? So we went through why most training is terrible. And that's just the reality. I mean, most training is terrible. But look at that as a positive and not a negative. Because if most training is terrible and your training is good, then what do you think that looks like to everyone else? I mean, you're going to stand like head and shoulders, as I said, above everyone else. So let's look at the 4 steps one last time before we kind of close up this podcast episode. So step 1, you get the pre-training survey. That's where you're going to ask some questions, use a Google form, and just really figure out what people need to know. Step 2, you've got create your training plan. That's where you're going to take what people told you they need to know, and you're going to put it in a format that they learn what they need to know. I mean, just like, yeah, woo! All right. And then step 3, you're going to execute the training, meaning you're going to go and do the training. And where did we all agree we're going to do the training? Somewhere other than the customer's site. Yes, I know. I'm going to subliminally, not subliminally. I don't know. What is the opposite of subliminally? Obviously? I don't know. But I'm going to put that into your head some way, shape, or form. And finally, we're going to do some post follow-up to the training. We're going to do some post-training follow-up, rather. And we are going to go and tell the customer the value of doing training after they've done training and why it makes sense to continue to revisit the system that they're going to use for their facility. So there you go. There you have it. That's how you go and do awesome training that is really, really cool. Now, as I mentioned, everything today can be found at buildingautomationmonthly.com/74. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/74. And if you think this is good, if you think you've learned a lot from my free podcasts, and you're like, man, this guy shares a lot of good stuff, then I'm telling you, you need to check out my building automation system training program. I take it to a whole nother level. I keep it fun, entertaining, and I teach you more in a couple hours than you will learn spending years trying to figure things out on your own. So if you want to massively accelerate, save time, grow in your knowledge of building automation systems, then I encourage you to join the over 500 plus customers who have gone through this training program by going to buildingautomationmonthly.com/BAS. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/BAS. And with that, we're closing the books on another episode, and I will talk to you all again in a couple days. In the meantime, keep pushing on, apply what you're learning, work hard, and you will be amazed at where you are in just a couple months from now. Thanks a ton. Take care. Talk to you soon.